A very pleasant good evening to you, everyone. It is Monday, November 26th, 2018. We're just after 8 p.m. here on the East Coast, and you're tuned in to episode 30 of the Connoisseurs of Wrestling. It is our 30th episode here in the year 2018. It's our final episode on YouTube. Of course, we'll be making the big move to Twitch beginning next week with the rest of the LIP family of wrestling podcasts. So we're closing out a very special era here of the show. But we'll be back and better than ever next week, of course, at our new home over on Twitch. We're going to shut it out here on YouTube the same way we started, talking about Japanese women's wrestling. And we got the full house here today to talk about it. Of course, the newest connoisseur, co-host of Two Guys, One Sport on Thursday evenings, Mr. George Atsaves. George, how you doing, my friend?
Oh, Mr. Kensington, Mr. Minion, Mrs. Lover, I am doing very well. It snowed up here, but my commute wasn't bad. You know, just had to make sure that the boots were still functioning, this morning on the way to the office. But had a decent day at the office, and I'm ready to have a good day with you all.
We need some of that global warming back. I'm not ready for the temperature to be this cold this darn quick.
Yeah, so. I'm waiting on it,
Just to give you a little education on it, global warming will cause cooling. It doesn't mean that you're going to have hot weather. It could mean you have really, really cold weather.
Duly noted.
Okay, then.
Sorry.
No, you're good.
I'm a science major.
No, I'd rather you tell the truth anytime.
Yeah, I was just being facetious. I just don't like cold weather. So.
Either do I.
And speaking of cold weather, of course, we have our lovely couple from Chicago, the Windy City, which is known for its cold weather, and it's also known for its cold-blooded football team right now, just demolishing people left and right. TakersMinion, we were talking off air about the Bears' chances of going far in the playoff this year. Let's hope, sir, for your sake and mine, that they do better than the Cubs did in baseball. How are you this fine evening?
Shots fired. Shots fired, George. You heard those gunshots, did you not?
I'm just, as Mama always says, the view is always best from the high road.
That's right. I'm taking the high road on this. I'm hoping that the Bears do well.
I'm giving compliments. I'm paying you compliments.
Since when am I from Chicago?
Well, y'all are closer to Chicago than I am.
Wait a minute. She's originally from South Milwaukee. Okay, I'm the only one from Chicago here besides George.
Well, if we go by what Taker usually says, Milwaukee is actually North Chicago.
That good old Midwestern corridor from Minneapolis down to Milwaukee to Chicago, and then over to Indianapolis, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, that good industrial heartland of America. I just call it the Midwest. So
it's still some of the greatest wrestling was in Chicago ever.
I won't dispute that, sir. I won't dispute that at all. Milwaukee, of course, had a couple of stalwarts that made it famous as well. Minneapolis had quite a few good matches in its time.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I read an article. Someone posted it to me on Twitter, and I went and read it. And the city of South Milwaukee has actually approved funding for a statue to be built downtown of one Reginald the Crusher Lasowski, one of their most famous residents of that town. Huh. He's going to have a statue built in downtown South Milwaukee, which is pretty cool.
That's really cool.
That is cool. You know what? Kudos to them for actually acknowledging the history of the territories like that, because, while he may not be a national household name today, this many years after his retirement and passing, he was very important to the Milwaukee area, several decades ago. So it's cool that they're acknowledging the history like that. So,
I just wish more cities would do that.
Absolutely agreed.
That's part of the reason why we're here, though, right? To keep the past alive.
Exactly.
I would say that's a good axiom. And speaking of axiom, of course, there's only one axiom that we live by here, and that is that LegendsLover is the best of us. She is the curator. She is the straw that stirs the drink, the glue that holds us all together. And she's back and better than ever for assignment last week. LegendsLover, so good to have you here. Looking forward to hearing your insights today. It's going to be a good show.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me back.
Thanks for having you back. We have to have you back. We're like monkeys running around with a football when you're not around. So, no, we did good last week, but we're always happy to have the full house. It's not the same with everybody not here. You got to have all four of us to make it the complete package. Otherwise, it just feels like, I don't know, like empty heart, empty mind. So, this show is the final show on YouTube, and it's also the final show of the month of November, which means, of course, that we'll be closing out our theme tonight on women in wrestling. Now, guys, what we've been doing over the last couple of weeks has been kind of pinpointing some different female stars in the business, all pretty much here in North America, that have made significant contributions to this sport that we love. We started with Miss Elizabeth as our Hall of Fame inductee for the month of November. We talked about her rise with Macho Man Randy Savage and the WWF. We also looked at Sensational Queen Sherry, a prominent wrestler in the territorial era, up through the AWA, and even in the early national expansion period of the WWF before she became a Hall of Fame quality manager in her own right. And last week, looking at Nancy Sullivan Benoit, aka Woman, kind of Sensational Sherry's counterpart in the Mid-Atlantic and the WCW area. You know, we've been looking, at some of these managers, but it's important to note that women's wrestling is not just restricted to the last 5 years in the WWF or in the WWE. We are all privy right now to the women's evolution, formerly the Divas Revolution, in the WWE, beginning really in 2015. That was kind of the benchmark year for this movement to really kick off. Women's wrestling before that in the WWE was very much hit or miss, depending on what era you're talking about. Of course, the very first episode of this show, TakersMinion, I'm sure you'll remember it very well, was really kind of the first era of women's wrestling in the WWF in the 80s, where the quality of the action not only measured what the men were doing, but actually surpassed it in many respects. Talking about the famous tag team rivalry between the Jumping Bomb Angels and the Glamour Girls.
Yeah, that was a, well, let's lay it out let's really put it out there, Biff, how that was what brought this show out together in the first place, is you and I having a conversation about this, about the Jumping Bomb Angels versus the Glamour Girls. And that's what started this whole show. So, yeah, we've kind of gone full circle, going back to that world. So.
Yeah, it is interesting that we've kind of come back to this subject here 30 weeks later, or 30 shows later. We look at, the feud that took place in the WWF and how it kind of, triggered a real passionate response from us, particularly because we remembered it and remembered, enjoying it so much. There's been different stretches in the company's history where women's wrestling picked up a little bit here and there. Alundra Blaze, a.k.a. Medusa from the AWA and WCW, she had a good run, 94, 95, wrestling against the likes of Bull Nakano and Rhonda Singh, a.k.a. Bertha Faye. Of course, the Attitude Era kind of took a step back. It kind of sexualized everything. But then as we got into the later 2000s, the Divas Championship era, there were some women that were very talented that came through, like a Beth Phoenix and Natalya. Of course, you had your Molly Hollies, who were always very capable in the ring. But really, over the last 5 years or so, women's wrestling in the WWE has kind of taken center stage, and it's really been presented as the strongest women's wrestling era that we've seen in North America since women began wrestling. It's kind of the genesis of, this new age of women's wrestling. But that's here in North America. There's been a women's revolution taking place over 40 years now in Japan that's far outpacing anything we're seeing over here. And it's interesting, we talk about the Jumping Bomb Angels and how we kind of started our show based on their feud with the Glamour Girls and how revolutionary they were. The Jumping Bomb Angels were a product of that first generation of really talented Japanese women's wrestlers who are coming over from Japan and plying their trade in the States and showcasing just a small taste of what the Joshi Puro scene was like over in Japan. And so that's what we wanted to finish up the month of November on here with the Connoisseurs of Wrestling. We wanted to take a look at Japanese women's wrestling, just kind of give you a broad overview of some of the big names, some of the big companies, some of the influential events, and really just kind of champion this product. George, a lot of people kind of think that Japanese women's wrestling is inaccessible, that it's hard to get into, but in fact, Japanese women's wrestling, for all its ups and downs over the years, has never been more accessible to Western audiences than it is right now, thanks to social media and just the plethora of women's promotions that have sprang up over the last 10 years. It's really been kind of a boom period for Joshi Puro.
It is. World of Stardom is incredibly accessible. I think it's like $8 a month, something like that. It's very, very cheap, and the quality is top notch. And that is just the tip of the iceberg. And Stardom is the #1 female promotion in Japan today, and has been for several years. It's where Kairi Sane and Io Shirai and cut their teeth. Shayna Baszler wrestled there for a little bit, and Toni Storm for a little bit, and all the who's who of women that aren't from the WWE NXT Performance Center worked in Stardom. And you can get that, like I said, for 2 cups of coffee a month. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
It's well worth every penny. It's so good.
Yeah, Stardom is a name that you're going to hear a lot of on tonight's episode. It's going to come up repeatedly because Stardom really is kind of the premier, I would say, the premier outlet for Joshi Puro in Japan right now. Now, over the years, there have been different companies that have come and gone that have kind of taken that banner up. Stardom is just kind of the latest in the line of them to kind of stand at the forefront of Japanese women's wrestling. But so many names that WWE fans would recognize today that you just rattled off. Io Shirai, Kairi Sane, the former Kairi Hojo. Toni Storm spent some time over in Stardom. Of course, one of the more interesting Japanese women's wrestlers in the WWE system right now, Asuka, as Kana, spent considerable time in her native land going through some of the Joshi promotion.
She was champion at Stardom, if I remember correctly. Am I right, George, or am I wrong?
You sound right. I almost think you are, to be honest. It rings a bell. It wouldn't shock me. I mean, and someone like Asuka, wrestled not only in Stardom, but she wrestled all over the place.
Yeah.
I mean, she wrestled Minoru Suzuki in a mixed tag match. Like her, she's done it all. So.
Well, it's kind of funny that we talk about Asuka. She worked in Japan as Kana.
Mm-hmm.
Asuka actually was taken as kind of a tribute to another famous Japanese women's wrestler, Lioness Asuka, who we'll talk about, obviously.
We will certainly talk about.
To my knowledge, Asuka / Kana did not wrestle Stardom. She wrestled in almost every other major Japanese women's promotion, though.
Joshi Pro, right? JWP?
Yeah, she was Joshi Pro. She also wrestled in Pro Wrestling Wave. Reina is kind of a rival to Stardom, or at least it was. She also was involved with Smash Diva Championship, which was the Japanese Smash promotion. There is at least a dozen Joshi Puro companies operating right now in Japan. Many of them have started only in the last 5 to 10 years. I'll just go over the list of some of them right now. Ice Ribbon is one of the oldest in operation still. It formed in 2006. Stardom, of course, is the top of the line. It was founded in 2011. Pro Wrestling Wave, 2007. Reina came around in 2011. Osaka Joshi Pro came in 2010. And there's a couple of others that have formed in the last 3 to 4 years. And these are just some of the major promotions that you can actually find on television in Japan. Some of these are covered by Samurai TV, Nico Nico. Some of them have their own streaming services. I know Stardom has their own service. I believe Pro Wrestling Wave may have their own. And many of the companies sell their own DVDs.
I believe Ice Ribbon does too.
I believe you're correct on that one. Ice Ribbon is, I think they have their own outlet as well. But that's kind of the interesting thing about Japanese women's wrestling. And we're going to be working backwards, I guess, because we're starting kind of in the modern era. And we'll work our way back to the mainstream era. Japanese women's wrestling really triggered the explosion of independent wrestling over the last 10 years. There was a down period after the fall of WCW and ECW here in North America when the WWE kind of stood alone. Japanese men's wrestling was kind of at its low point with Antonio Inoki kind of infusing the MMA style into New Japan and nearly driving that company into the ground as a result. Mainstream Japanese wrestling kind of collapsed in a lot of respect. This was kind of the era of the downfall of All Japan when it began to recede. Pro Wrestling Noah, 01, some of these promotions, Dragon Gate kind of formed. But, you know, for the most part, the peak of the Japanese wrestling scene that we saw in the 90s had kind of collapsed. And a lot of the major national Japanese women's promotions, like All Japan Women Wrestling or Gaia Japan, they collapsed along with their male counterparts. It was really a wrestling recession in Japan throughout the 2000s. And that was kind of the state of the business all over. You know, I kind of feel like we'll look back in the next 20 years at the 2000s as almost a lost generation. If you just look at the WWE men's scene between 2005 and 2010, there's just this huge gap on the roster right now where there's just not many people from that era. They either predate it, they're older, or they came after. But there's just not many stars that were built by the WWE during that period. You really have to look hard at places like Ring of Honor or TNA to find people from the 2000s that, you know, really made a big impact in the business. But that has changed in the last 10 years. We have seen an explosion of wrestling content all over the world. Just look at the current WWE system. How many great wrestlers have they produced in Australia and New Zealand lately? I mean, they're just pumping out quality performers left and right like no one's business. Of course, New Japan has never been hotter than it has been over the last decade. It's really turned things around. We see the British wrestling scene explode like it hasn't since the 1980s. Companies like
since the end of World of Sport, yeah,
it's just been an amazing turnaround. Joshi Puro experienced that kind of turnaround at the same time, beginning around 2008, 2009 into 2010. All sorts of different promotions began to reignite the passion that wrestling fans in Japan had for Joshi wrestling. And so that's why today you see an influx of Japanese women's talent into the WWE system. We had Asuka come in 2015, and then we saw her followed by Kairi Sane and Io Shirai. Meiko Satomura made a big name for herself in this year's Mae Young Classic. Of course, Kairi Sane won the first Mae Young Classic. So Japanese women's wrestling has really been a dominant fixture of the Mae Young Classic series since its inception. And has played a big part in the women's evolution down at NXT. Of course, Asuka, the longest reigning NXT women's champion. Kairi Sane followed in her footsteps, and Io Shirai, I'm sure, is going to be a women's champion in NXT before all is said and done. I want to focus in on Io Shirai right now, George, because I think you may agree with my assessment on this. Io Shirai represents the first time in my lifetime, at least, that I could honestly sit back and say, you know, Io Shirai is one of the top 5 workers in the world, irregardless of gender. Like, if you remove gender from the equation, you could legitimately make a case that Io Shirai is one of the top 5, top 10 workers in the world, male or female. Would you agree with that?
I'd make that case, and I would say it's the first time since that you can make that case since Manami Toyota's prime, 20 years ago, right? I mean, 15 years ago, when Manami Toyota was wrecking people in AJW, and if you told me that in, let's say, 1999. Manami Toyota was one of the 5 best workers of her era of 1999. I wouldn't argue with you. And in terms of just strictly in-ring ability, I mean, it's her, it's Kenta Kobashi, obviously. It's Mitsuharu Misawa. And then there's kind of a gap, you know? And I think you can make that same argument for Io Shirai in terms of just pure in-ring ability and the ability to tell a story in professional wrestling, that she's one of the best. And she's what, 26, 25, right?
Like, talking about Io Shirai?
Yeah.
Let me see. I'll tell you in a minute.
She's
in her 30s, I think.
I don't think she was that old. I thought she was much younger.
28.
28, okay. So she's not even 30. The sky's the limit, you know?
Yeah, Asuka is 37, Kairi Sane is 30, Io Shirai is 28. So let's just put the gauntlet down here, because these are probably the 3 most accessible names that modern fans would know that don't have the background in Japanese women's wrestling that you or I might, George. You've got Kairi Sane, you've got Asuka, and you've got Io Shirai. Kind of grade these 3, like, who would you take, you know, ranking them in order from best to least?
Give me those names again, I'm sorry.
Asuka, Io Shirai, and Kairi Sane. Kind of the 3 big Japanese women's stars that have...
Are we talking on November 20... What's the date? 24th?
26th today.
Are we talking November 26th, 2018?
As we sit right here on November 26th, if you had to rank those 3...
I would say Kairi Sane, I would say Io Shirai, and I would say Asuka.
So you've got Kairi Sane above Io Shirai.
Yes. Right now, as of today, I do, yeah. Although that was a sexy moonsault in those skinny jeans at NXT, you know?
Yes,
it was a pretty moonsault. So I gotta give her credit for that.
Io's got the most beautiful moonsault I've ever seen.
It's so pretty.
It is.
Just snaps it, and she jumps in the rope. I mean, it is the only one I could think of that's even close is like in his prime, like Rey Mysterio.
Yep.
Like 25-year-old Rey Mysterio when he had springs in his feet. You know?
She hits you with that thing, and she hits the landing. When she does it, she's, you know, perfectly timed. The impact point is the same. It's consistent. She's consistent with it. She doesn't try to rush it. She lets it build its own thing. You know, you mentioned something earlier. I think it was you said Io or Takana wrestled the, you know, intergender matches, right?
Yep.
Oh yeah.
We forgot to mention that Kairi Sane, aka Kairi Hojo, and Io Shirai wrestled in Lucha Underground against Pentagon as part of the Black Lotus Triad. And
it did. My Avatar. The 3 of them.
All 3 of them.
Yeah.
And they had a solid match that night. It was really good.
Yeah.
I've seen that match.
Oh, go on. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, George.
I was just saying before Lucha Underground kind of went off the rails, you know?
Yeah. Lucha Underground isn't as good anymore. I don't know what happened.
No, to say the least, is not.
They got a little bit too soap opera for me.
Yeah, a little too melodrama, you know?
Well, I want to step back here for a moment because I want to kind of make sure that I'm following you here. Would you say that Kairi Sane, if she is ranked ahead of Io Shirai on your list, would you say that Kairi Sane is also one of the top 10 workers in the world right now?
I think I'd have to. I mean,
I would agree with that. To be perfectly honest with you, I'd agree with that.
The top 10 workers in the world on November 26, 2018.
And
I think
gender has no bearing.
No, just workers. And we're just talking bell to bell. We're not talking business. We're not talking promos, right? We're just talking bell to bell.
Yeah, let's just look at in-ring quality here.
Yeah. I'm running through a list off the top of my head real quick. I think Kairi Sane is like 8th, 9th on that list. You know? Mm-hmm. Somewhere in the bottom of the top 10. Yeah, I think
Kairi can tell a hell of a story in the ring.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at that match you had with Shayna Baszler at the Takeover, not the one that they just had, but the one before, where they basically said, "Hey, the G1 final was pretty good. We can do that too." Yeah, you know, the one at SummerSlam weekend, and it was just Kairi Sane's really good at this. Kairi Sane has chosen a good career for her talents.
Yes.
Okay, so if Kairi Sane for you is 7th or 8th, that would make Io Shirai 9th or 10th.
Yeah, they're they're neck and neck.
Okay.
I mean, the only wrestlers I can definitively, and obviously this is my list. Your mileage may vary. The only wrestlers I can absolutely put above them in terms of in-ring ability are Okada, Tanahashi, Ishii, Daniel Bryan, and then that's the top tier, and then they're in the next grouping. You know what I'm saying?
Guys like Styles, Naito.
Yeah. Although I'm still waiting for the great AJ Styles match of 2018, but there's enough.
Okay, you said Styles.
Kota Ibushi's in that group. A healthy Will Ospreay is in that group.
A healthy Roman Reigns is probably
Roman Reigns is in that. I mean, obviously, I can't put Ospreay and Roman because they're hurt. You know, they're not healthy right now. Obviously, one is sick and one is quote just hurt as opposed to sick. You know, but they're definitely in. I mean, Matt Riddle when he's not selling to jobbers is in that group. You know, like. Johnny Gargano was in that group when he's not screwing around, but there's a lot of caveats, you know. Whereas with Io Shirai and Kairi Sane, I don't have to say so and so if not for X, you know.
Right.
So yeah, Kairi Sane is the real deal, and you don't need me to tell you that if you have eyes. and Io Shirai is the real deal, and you don't need me to tell you that if you have eyes. Like you know.
When I saw her come running out during the match with Shayna Baszler, I was figuring, oh, hell no. Kairi just won the match. I was convinced at that point. And no.
It was actually a well put together match. It's
just the wrong person run. That's all. The wrong person won.
Well, I mean, we could get into the debate over the actual.
Well, I don't want to. That's for another show, for another time.
Yeah. But it was a very fun match while it lasted. But that kind of quality bump that we've seen in NXT over the last 5 years, and it's not solely restricted to the Japanese women's wrestlers. I mean, obviously, the 4 horsewomen of NXT brought a huge jump in quality. Emma and Paige, Natty Neidhart when she went down to work a few shows. I mean, they've all got a hand in bringing the quality of women's wrestling up. But Japanese women's wrestling in particular is unique because unlike North American women's wrestling, Japanese women's wrestling did have serious credibility and had credibility for years and years. As a matter of fact, Japanese women's wrestling kind of collapsed in the 2000s. And what we're seeing now is almost a rebirth. So in the same time that North American women's wrestling was first starting to become credible, athletic, and on par with the men, Japanese women's wrestling was doing the same thing over Japan, except they were doing it for the second time. They were rebuilding, rebranding. And so Io Shirai, Kana, Asuka, these three women kind of represent like the newest generation of top stars. And there's plenty of other Japanese talent in the system right now that you probably haven't heard of that will obviously, be making a name for themselves in the very near future as well. Mai Iwatani deserves some cred here. Another standout from Stardom. She's also considered one of the best workers in the world, male or female. And that's not just coming from any random source. That's coming from Dave Meltzer.
Yeah, it's...
And say what you will about Meltzer.
Mayu's the third of the Holy Trinity of women's wrestling, in terms of modern Japanese homegrown stars, and that's with all due respect to Meiko Satomura, who's of an earlier generation, and it's still unbelievable, But Mayu is a whole nother animal in and of herself. She's just sensational.
You mentioned Meiko Satomura. It's interesting. Satomura definitely is from an earlier generation. I mean, she was really first breaking in the 1990s. She's actually kind of in the last generation of the old school Joshi Puro promotions, and then she kind of weathered the interim period and has now come out on the other side as kind of a veteran. Meiko Satomura, this was made mention of during the Mae Young Classic. She actually appeared on WCW Nitro during a very brief flirtation that WCW had introducing Japanese women's wrestling into its programming. This was during the period between 1995 and 1998 when Eric Bischoff was trying to present different styles of wrestling to try and tap into different audiences that the WWF at the time was not servicing. Of course, we had the big Lucha push.
That was when the first hour of Nitro was the best hour of wrestling television anywhere in the world.
People just don't know what they missed.
Yeah, I mean, the first hour of Nitro, the unopposed hour, when it was, because Nitro was 3 hours and Raw was 2, and for that 18 months, would you say, Biff, give or take, from 95 to mid 97 before it got all heavy and stupid. Right, give or take. That sounds like about right. That hour was, I mean, you saw a who's who of cruiserweights and lucha and Japanese legends, and it was just unbelievable.
Oh yeah,
television.
Yeah,
it's like, oh hey, look, Jushin Liger is wrestling Ultimo Dragon, and it's great. Yeah.
Taker, you watched WCW during that period too. You have
oh yeah, I remember that hour, and it would be, there were some hellacious matches. Like George said, oh look, Jushin Thunder Liger is wrestling Ultimo Dragon. Oh, there's Juventud Guerrera wrestling Rey Mysterio. Wait a minute, there's La Parka wrestling Super Calo. Yeah, there's it's just like,
oh hey look, there's Eddie Guerrero and Dean Malenko, or what? And you know what? And that was on the reg.
Yeah, and that would be the last match of the hour. Yeah. And they would kill it. Those two.
The best part, you knew they were good because the crowd would have no idea who they were to start, and they'd be silent, and by the end of the match, the crowd would be jumping up and down.
Yeah.
That's as good as it gets,
Well, I mean, if you look back at the WCW picture between 95 and really 97, I would say is kind of when it peaked, I guess. We know that the company made huge inroads into introducing Lucha Libre. That was probably its biggest infusion of kind of international style. But they did other stuff too. I mean, look at the British style that Fit Finlay and William Regal were producing. Fit Finlay from Northern Ireland, Regal, of course, from Manchester, that classic, hook wrestling style. You had some of the best Canadian talent coming out of Calgary with Benoit, Jericho. Lance Storm would eventually come up into WCW, that very technical oriented style. You had Japanese talent. Kensuke Sasaki was a U.S. champion for the company for a while. You had Ultimo Dragon coming over, bringing that Super Junior style. Jushin Liger, really from the early 90s, have been a standout. Of course, Keiji Muto.
I got a quick question to ask anybody here.
Sure.
Does anybody know exactly how old Jushin Lager is?
It's near 50, I believe. If not older.
I was going to say, he has to be closer to 60.
Healthy living, whatever he's doing,
Because he had to have been in his late 20s, mid to late 20s back in the 90s.
He is 53.
Holy shit, he's younger than me.
He's born 1964. But to your credit, yeah, he's wrestled more than 30 years. He's wrestled over 2,500 matches. One of the all-time great workers.
And now he's one of the father, or was it father? You call them fathers of New Japan?
Yeah, he's that's the perfect way of putting it.
Yeah, he's kind of like falling in line with the Yuji Nagata's.
He's still good.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, he wrestles in Ring of Honor occasionally. It's still a treat to see the man go at it. Japanese, there's something in the water about, and this goes the same with Japanese women's wrestling, because we just saw Meiko Satomura. She's pushing 50, and she can still go like nobody's business. But there's something about Japanese hard wrestlers that they can just go forever and just not slow down. Yep. It's just they.
The only thing that may ever slow them down is just injuries.
Yeah, and even then, I mean, when's the last time Meiko Satomura was hurt? I mean, Io Shirai has the bad neck, that we know, but like the rest is,
She also Io Shirai also had that heart issue.
That's right. I forgot about that.
That is what disqualified her from WWE the first time. A year ago.
I forgot about that. She had the heart murmur or whatever it was.
Yeah, and that's everybody thinks it was the neck, and it wasn't the neck; it was her heart. She went back to Japan. She got on the medications and everything, got that thing fixed, and look where she is now.
Yeah, sky's the limit.
Yep. She wanted to come back. She knew that Kairi Sane got everything she was supposed to get. That's how she feels.
Yeah.
Io was heartbroken, absolutely heartbroken last year, and a lot of people don't know that. That's the one thing I like about a lot of these Joshi wrestlers. They are more emotionally connected to what they're doing than anybody I've ever seen.
Yeah.
When they break down and start crying, it's real. It's actual real feelings.
Yeah,
it's not something that they can, they have to think about something in order to make it. No, if they win a championship and they start crying, it's because they've been humbled, and that's just the way they are.
Well, there's the barriers in Japanese women's wrestling are perhaps the strongest and the most difficult to overcome of any in the world. The Joshi wrestling scene is one of the most difficult wrestling scenes to compete in because of the expectation of quality, because of the difficulty just getting into the business in general. If you make it in Japan, whether you're coming up through the New Japan Dojo, whether you're coming up through the Joshi scene, or any of the other promotions, you have really done something fantastic. Because Japanese wrestling, honestly, I tend to believe this, and y'all mileage may differ. I think it's the highest quality per capita in the world. It's the best overall product per capita when you compare it to the North American style that we see on display in WWE. It's the best that you'll see. Tops out the British style, it tops Lucha Libre, tops out the Australian schools. It is what it is. It's a tough business to break into. And there's some darker sides to this too. There is some darker sides to this because Joshi wrestling has not always had the respectability that it once had in the 1980s and the 1990s. You had promotions like All Japan Women's Pro and Gaia Japan that were, filling out arenas just like the male promotions were. They were legitimate businesses that were, going toe-to-toe with their male counterparts. But there have been times over the last several decades where some of the smaller promotions have turned to less than honorable ways of making money off of their talent.
Yeah.
It's, you know, kind of what we might consider almost a form of softcore pornography.
Yeah.
Has kind of exploded in popularity over the last several decades in Japan with Japanese women's wrestling, and these performers have to go through these photo shoots, these movies where they're essentially, it's almost, you know, kind of an exploitation industry at times.
Kana went through it.
Kana had to go through it.
Yep. And a lot of people don't know that about Asuka. She had to go. She did that.
It's the difference between having a career and not having a career. And so there's that seedy underside of it all that it's just as compounding to the difficulties that women already have breaking in to the business. And you have to understand as well, the people that are running Joshi Puro Promotions now are the generation that really established Joshi Puro as one of the most pure art forms in the world. And so if you don't go 150% every night out, they will beat the crap out of you. There's a famous video, and I really wish I could remember the promotion that it was covering. It was a documentary about women trying to break into the Japanese women's scene, and they were being trained. And the trainer was not happy with the progress of the student, and she stiffed her on a drop kick. Like, she showed her what happens when someone takes liberties with them in the ring, and she completely busted up her face, Becky Lynch style, off a drop kick. Done it deliberate to teach her a lesson. You know, and in Japan, that's nothing out of the ordinary. That's just, you show respect for the business. You live it, you breathe it. It is your entire life. You are dedicated to this 150% nonstop, or else you're kicked out. And so, yeah, the show of emotion is legitimate because you are literally achieving life goals here. It's that serious. It's that honorable of an art form. And it's been like that for decades now.
Well, the best way, and you know, Biff, you're probably gonna hate me, but the best way I can compare it with, you know, Joshi Puro right now, they fight to a form of the Bushido code, which is what sumo does.
You're right.
Mm-hmm. What the women have done in Japan is they've taken a lot of the codes and ethics from sumo and made it their own. And the top promotions like Stardom and whatnot, they are the ones that are really, really promoting it. And if you look at where people want to go over in Japan when they go there, it's Stardom. Everybody wants to perform in Stardom. Why? Because it's the top promotion right now from what everybody is saying. I don't know how much truth there is to that, but that's what I've been hearing, is that Stardom is basically the women's WWE over in Japan. I don't know.
The sumo analogy is a good one because, I mean, the very first Japanese wrestling legend, Ricky Dozan, was a former sumo wrestler. And he brought that style and basically invented wrestling in Japan with the help of American GIs stationed over there during the occupation from the ground up. And he was able to just create it how he wanted to. And he said, I want to make this like sumo wrestling because my people know what that's like, you know? And a combination of Ricky Dozan's unbelievable charisma and the Japanese psyche after the Second World War and burgeoning television deals, Asahi One, channels like that, you know, and American GIs who knew what wrestling was. I mean, the two biggest exports the Americans brought to Japan between 1945 and 1955 were baseball and professional wrestling. Yeah. You know, like that's, and the two biggest sports in Japan are baseball and professional wrestling, and baseball, sumo, and professional wrestling. You know, and so it always strikes me as funny that like that cauldron, you know, where you combine 90,000 American troops looking for something to do, and Ricky Dozan, a former mediocre sumo wrestler, and he says, "Well, I can be a professional wrestler." You know, and you combine it with this uniquely Japanese view of looking at themselves and how they view themselves in the greater world. And next thing you know, you have 40 promotions and hundreds of thousands of people going to shows and video of people lined up in outside. There's footage of people in restaurants sitting there watching Ricky Dozan matches, riveted on these little black and white TVs.
Yep.
You know, and that's the spirit really that the women have latched onto, and the men too. But in Japan, it was always presented as a sport. It was never presented as
entertainment.
Entertainment, and not even that. It's never been presented as, oh, here are the women. It's time to take a piss. The women were always presented as equal to the men from the beginning.
Oh yes,
yes, you know, from day one. It was never women's wrestling and men's wrestling. It was just, this is wrestling. And it's segregated by gender, but it's not segregated by status, if that makes sense. Like, there are no intergender promotions in Japan of any note. You know, it's just, it's how they do things. You know, New Japan only has men, Stardom only has women, and All Japan only has men, and DDT, and et cetera, you know, with few exceptions.
Like the comedy promotions will sometimes do.
Yeah, it's every now and again you get like a DDT, you get like a weird undercard DDT match, you know. But it's always presented as a one-off, and it's never presented seriously. Well, you know, but it's funny because like the fandom there is okay with that though.
Yeah.
Like the Japanese wrestling fan who lives in Japan is not clamoring for, oh, why don't they integrate these promotions? You know, they're okay with that.
Well, it's interesting. You know, we talk about the kind of the segregation of the promotions and how women's wrestling has always been separated from the men's promotions. I'm going to point out a fact here in just a moment to that end that I think a lot of people would have their minds blown about. But just covering on the Meiko Satomura thing right quick, I wanted to run down the tournament for the WCW Women's Championship that was created largely for Medusa. Alundra Blaze, when she jumped famously to Nitro in '95. Of the 8 women involved in this tournament, 7 were from Japan. You had some people from like Gaia Japan, like Reina Jabuki, or you had Sonoko Kato, Meiko Satomura, the aforementioned star from this year's Megan Classic. She was involved. She lost in the first round to the eventual champion, Akira Hakuto. 2 names that would obviously be a little bit more well-known for American fans. Bull Nakano, she wrestled Medusa at Hog Wild in 1996. That was a pretty famous...
Bull Nakano had a run with WWF, too.
Yes, she did. Bull Nakano and Ronda Singh were 2 big imports, along with some other Japanese talent. Now, this is interesting. I think it's from I want to say the 1994 Survivor Series. I'm going to go check this out and make sure I've got the year right. It was either 94 or 95. But Vince, for some reason, produced a match featuring a lot of Japanese women's talent. And it just kind of struck me as coming out of nowhere. It must have been 95 because I'm not seeing it on the 94 list. Yeah, here we go. 1995 Survivor Series. Check out this little list. We've got Aja Kong, Bertha Faye, who wrestled as Ronda Singh in Japan, Lioness Asuka, and Tomoko Watanabe defeated the team of Alundra Blaze, Teparita Asiri, Koyo Inoue, and Saki Hasegawa. So, you know, just running off of that list, obviously Lioness Asuka, and
Aja Kong. Aja Kong and Medusa have had some battles.
Yeah. So
and Aja Kong is still wrestling today. That's the scary part. She's still over in Japan wrestling.
Well, you know, the rumors were that Alundra Blaze actually wanted to leave WWF because of some of the beatings that she was being put through every night, wrestling the likes of Aja Kong and Bull Nakano. That's the rumor, that why she actually wanted to jump. So, but I'm not going to confirm or deny that because Medusa could probably beat the crap out of me still today.
Still feel pretty solid.
But I want to touch back on the segregation of the promotions here because this is a fact that I don't think a lot of people know. And Taker, George, I'm going to get you to weigh in on this, and then LL, I want to have you jump in here in a moment with a question for you. But for anyone here that knows the Japanese wrestling scene with any sense of history about it, what are considered the top 2 men's promotions of all time in Japanese men's wrestling?
Simple. New Japan, All Japan.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Fair enough.
The legacy of Ricky Dozan, his 2 biggest students.
Exactly. Giant Baba and Antonio.
Inoki. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What year were those 2 promotions founded?
Oh, shit. I couldn't tell you that.
73?
72.
Okay. I knew it was early 70s.
Guess what predates both All Japan and New Japan?
What's that?
All Japan Women's Pro Wrestling.
Okay.
The first and longest lasting national promotion in the Japanese wrestling scene up until its closure in 2005 was a Joshi Puro promotion.
Okay.
All Japan Women's Pro Wrestling got its start in 1965, reorganized in 68, and then made it all the way to 2005. At the time of its closure, it had been the longest running Japanese promotion, male or female, in the history of the country. Now, New Japan and All Japan both have since surpassed it because obviously they've continued operations, although All Japan has fluctuated in size.
Yeah, All Japan is weird because the company that is All Japan now is only thing it has in common with All Japan of, Kenta Kobashi is the name.
Yeah.
New ownership, new presidency, new leadership, etc.
Right. And even to that extent, New Japan has undergone quite a transformation as well in its ownership.
Absolutely.
But it is noteworthy, I think, here that we talk about Japanese women's wrestling and kind of highlighting how important it was to the Japanese wrestling scene overall. You've got a national women's promotion in 1968, a full 4 years before All Japan and New Japan would form. And so, honestly, it would take almost 20 years for either All Japan or New Japan to truly become huge success stories. I would argue, and this is more semantic argument maybe than anything else, but you could argue that Japanese women's wrestling was as big, if not bigger, in the 1980s than some of what you would see out of New Japan. Because while Inoki and Baba were both respected stars in their own right, All Japan didn't develop the kind of international reputation that it had until the 90s when we saw the King's Road style come in with the likes of Misawa and Kawada and Kobashi. New Japan obviously had a very robust junior heavyweight scene, but outside of a few standouts like Tatsumi Fujinami and the Great Muta over the years, I don't think New Japan would reach its full potential until the era of Hiroshi Tanahashi.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think you're selling the Three Musketeers a little short, but even that's like 96. With Masa Chono and Shinya Hashimoto, and
I do stand corrected. There was a period of the 90s where they get overlooked a little bit because of what All Japan was doing.
Exactly. But I mean, I ride or die with Shinya Hashimoto.
Yeah,
he's my home. He's my boy. Big. I mean, any longtime listener of mine will know that the one thing in the world that makes me happier than anything is just big, thick guys chopping the shit out of people.
Masahiro Chono and Yuji Nagata deserve a little bit of praise here.
Absolutely. But I get your general point is not wrong. I mean, you look at, a callback to our draft show. I drafted the Crush Gals, and they were literal rock stars.
Yeah.
And they were drawing ratings. They were drawing ratings in the 30s. Shares in the 30s, which means that a third of all televisions in the country of Japan, 100 million people, were watching them wrestle. Now, yes, obviously pre-cable and only a few channels and et cetera, and it's a much less balkanized television landscape in 1985 than it is now, obviously.
But here's the difference, though. I would challenge anybody to try to beat those numbers today.
So would I. I would challenge anyone to be 10% of those numbers.
If Vince McMahon had anybody, if Vince McMahon could get Becky Lynch or Charlotte Flair to draw a quarter of those numbers, he would
be happy with 10%.
He would die from priapism.
Raw draws 2.5 million people, and it's a victory. I mean, these ladies were drawn 15, 20, 25 million people every week. And this is Japan's smaller than the United States too.
Yeah.
So that's even more impressive. I mean, you look at the numbers, it's like literally a quarter of all television sets during that hour block were watching that show because the Crush Gals, were so over and so dominant.
The Crush Gals would sell out any arena that they went to.
Absolutely. And did.
There are certain, we talk about this, and the one thing that's not come up yet, and I want to bring this up, is this. You mentioned it, Biff, that the only thing that's separate is because they're male and female. The styles are very similar. Mm-hmm. They are both they still, but now, and I challenge anybody on this, the women in Japan do more strong style than the men do.
Oh yeah, it's especially
you will have two women sit in the ring, literally beating the shit out of each other. Whereas in New Japan, you have more showmanship now. You don't have so much ass kicking; you have showmanship.
I would argue that strong style really found its roots in All Japan Women's Pro in the 80s. When you had like Devil Masami, Jaguar Yokota, one of my favorites, Dump Matsumoto. Of course, we mentioned Bull Nakano earlier, Aja Kong, the Crush Gals. These women were known for being ultra stiff. I mean, you talk about beating the piss out of people.
I mean, All Japan Women's, you seen now. One of the I don't know who it was. I don't remember who the wrestlers were. I think George, you sent me the link once or you talked about it on your show. Two Guys, One Sport, Thursdays, 9/8 Central.
Hey, thank you.
Where a pile driver was given. A pile driver was used on a table, on the announce table. And it was two women going at it. Where in the world do you see that today? You don't. You don't see pile drivers, period. Well, maybe in New Japan you do, but that's strictly men. But you don't see women doing it. But over in Japan, they do it. Hey, pile drive it. Boom. You're seeing them bleed. You're seeing the women bleed over in Japan. You don't see that here.
Oh yeah.
And they hard way it. They don't blade. They hard way.
It is
legit cuts. And
it is legit cuts, and they are treated just like the men are.
There was a series of matches in the 90s. And you mentioned the draft that we had. I actually drafted her. Megumi Kudo had a series of matches with Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling, FMW, which if you're familiar with Japanese wrestling in the 90s, you know exactly where I'm going with this. This was the promotion that was doing your C4 barbed wire death matches and your light bulbs in the ring and, people burning themselves with flaming cattle prods and stuff. And Japanese women would go out there and they would bleed buckets just like the men would. I mean, anything the men were doing, the women were doing in Japan. And this is where I want LL to jump in because LL, you grew up watching the Midwestern territories. You came of age in Milwaukee. You have experience with the AWA and some of the other regional promotions. Kind of give us a dichotomy. What was women's wrestling like for you growing up as a fan versus what we're seeing in Japan over the same period where the women are almost as respected, if not more respected than their male counterparts? What is the women's scene like in the 70s and the 80s that you're watching? Actually, I think we lost Taker and LL there momentarily. George, I'm going to have you jump in here on a different question.
I'm here.
Oh, LL, were you able to hear that last question towards you?
Yeah, I don't know much about the Japanese wrestling because I don't watch it. But growing up, the way the women's were, the women wasn't really respected that much. They were, and then they weren't. You didn't see very much of the women's wrestling. When it got to be more in the 80s and that, it was more, they were used as, I don't know, it was more sex objects. Once you got to the WWF, the wrestling what you had with the women, it was more unique because you didn't see very much of it.
So it's kind of like gimmicky, sort of like special box office attraction. It's not treated though. Like you wouldn't never see the AWA Women's Championship being considered on equal with the AWA World Championship, would you?
No. You wouldn't see that in any of the territories.
Well, see, I think that's why Japanese women's wrestling is so interesting. At a time period, and we're talking the 70s and 80s here in the AWA period, and this could go for any territory, whether it's Fabulous Moolah in New York or whether it's Sweet Georgia Brown in the Southern Territories or whatever we've got going on in Dallas, Florida, you name the territory, basically. While women's wrestling is considered, kind of like a sideshow here in the States, you've got people like Lioness Asuka and the Crush Gals drawing millions of viewers in Japan. They are mainstream celebrities. They are mainstream stars. And the question I guess I would have, why is Japanese women's wrestling, taking off in an era when North American women's wrestling is stagnating? I never really understood that. Was it just the people in charge of the promotions here?
Yeah. It was the people in charge of the promotions here. That's what it boils down to. It was the promoters themselves that shot themselves in the ass.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It was Vince, and it was Fritz, and it was Ted, and it was Vern at the end, and it was
Vern. It was Eddie Graham, or the Grahams down in Florida.
The Andersons in Georgia. It was,
It was all the promoters and bookers that stepped away from it. And meanwhile, so where did all the women go for the longest time? They went over to Japan. That's why Medusa went over there. That's why, a lot of women from here in the United States went over there and they made it.
We talked about Sherry Martel a couple weeks ago. She went over.
Yeah.
Luna Vachon went over for a time.
They went over, and when they came back, they were 100 times better than they were before they left. Because they came back, they were treated as an equal to the men over there. Even though they were segregated because of their sex, they were still equals. You look at Medusa's face; she's got scars on it. Why? She got busted open more than once in the matches with Aja Kong. Aja Kong is one tough bitch, and Medusa will tell you that they literally hated one another while she was there.
Oh, there were no punches being pulled.
No,
to be certain, and it's interesting. It's just kind of finding a way to tie it back into the modern era. And I don't mean to sound like the modern era of women's wrestling in WWE is like subpar.
It's not.
Some of it is, but some of it is not. And it's like, not all Japanese women's wrestling is of like this premium level that we're talking. I mean,
no.
Performers who are not as good as some of their counterparts. I don't want to make it out like all Japanese women's wrestlers are wrestling on the Kurt Angle 2003 tier.
No, they're not. I mean, they've got the wrestlers like they even today. They've got the Alexa Blisses, the one that don't want to bump.
Yeah, so it's not universal, but I don't want to make it out like the WWE has been competing with scraps here. There's a lot of talent in their women's divisions, but I honestly think, and this is a perfect touchstone on what's kind of been going on in the last couple of weeks in the company. I don't think that the WWE has ever truly gotten behind a female superstar in the ring like Japanese women's promotions used to in the 80s. Like, we've never had our Crush Gals type unit here in North American wrestling. I mean, you could argue for a time that you had individual acts like Sable was really hot in the 90s during the Attitude Era, but she was never really a wrestler. She was more of just kind of a sex symbol thrown out there. You could say maybe Trish Stratus and Lita were kind of like the two big stars of the era that were actually known for their in-ring work. But I don't think the company ever truly treated them as being bigger stars than the men. They were just two really popular female stars, but they never were considered on the level of their male counterparts. Honestly, I don't think until you get to 2018 do you see the paradigm start to shift. And I see it in two specific places. I see it in Ronda Rousey, who's bringing the MMA credibility in with her. And she's basically being considered, you know, one of the big box office draws the company has. But organically, Becky Lynch, I think, is starting to develop a groundswell of organic support that goes beyond what we've seen customarily in the women's division. Like, she is starting to make the leap from being a big female star to a big star. And there's no great shock about this that the main event of WrestleMania, the rumors are swirling, Becky Lynch and Ronda Rousey could be the first women to ever main event a WrestleMania card.
And, you know, it's real quick, if I can jump in real fast. If that is indeed the main event, it won't feel patronizing.
No.
It won't be, oh, look at us with the WWE. We're giving you a main event just because. Like Charlotte, Sasha Banks in the Cell. You know?
Right.
Just because it'll feel like a worthy main event.
Exactly. This is the first time that we've seen women's wrestlers in the WWE transcend the boundary. Like, there's been this glass ceiling. I hate the term glass ceiling in general, but here it's apropos. There was a certain level that women's wrestling could reach in the WWE. It's this far, no further. And Charlotte Flair has had a tremendous run of success. She is a credit to her father. She's carried that family legacy extraordinarily well. She's been a great women's wrestler. Sasha Banks, a great women's wrestler. Bayley in NXT, great women's wrestler. But there's a difference between being a great women's wrestler in the WWE and being a top star. And, you know, there's a long time to go between now and New Jersey when they get to WrestleMania.
Yep.
But
and it's a company that can screw up a two-car funeral. So
they
keep that in mind.
They can snatch defeat from the jaws of victory like nobody's business.
You know it, my friend.
Yep.
Absolutely.
But here is the question, the biggest question. No, this is not the biggest question. This is the biggest statement. This is the 800-pound gorilla in the room. It's a question. Why does WWE put governors on most of their female talent? We're not seeing Asuka be Asuka on the main roster. We're not seeing the same Asuka that we saw in NXT. Why is that? That's the big question.
Honestly,
You saw the last woman standing match that was my match of the year last year for shooting debris. The Asuka versus Nikki Cross. And Asuka won it by 2 seconds getting up. You know, brilliant match. I'm going to give credit where credit is due. Charlotte and Becky put on a great last woman standing match, but it don't hold a candle to that one. I'm sorry. It's still second place.
I think obviously the answer to your question begins and ends with Vince McMahon.
It all begins and ends with Vince McMahon.
I mean, you could make out points like, you know, Kevin Dunn doesn't like it or somebody on the creative team doesn't like it. But at the end of the day, if Vince thinks you've got money in you, Vince will push you. And if he don't, he won't. And I think that he's kind of rested a lot in Alexa Bliss because Alexa Bliss can talk. She can't wrestle very well, but she can talk. And she's gotten herself over through her mic work. She's rested a lot in Charlotte because of the Flair name and the athleticism that Charlotte brings to the table. Charlotte Flair looks like a credible athlete. She's built like a athletic, strong woman that can carry that legacy factor in with her. Her name value plus her athleticism makes her a star. Alexa Bliss is probably one of the best on the microphone, so she's a star. This thing going on with Becky Lynch right now, and granted, since Nia Jax decided to break her face like a complete doofus maloofus, we haven't seen her on TV, so we're gonna have to wait and see how she kind of recovers from that. If she recovers at all, she's still not been cleared, and concussions are not a one-size-fit-all thing. We're talking about like she could be the WrestleMania main event. It could take several months for her to heal up from this. But I'm done bitching at Nia about this because I'm just going to say mean things if I go back into that. But Becky Lynch has really become something new in this company. And it's important to point that out because what Becky Lynch is becoming in WWE now, that's what Japanese women's wrestling was as far back as the 1970s.
Mm-hmm.
People that were nationally known, that were doing, national endorsements on products, doing commercials, making all of the publicity rounds. That was par for the course for Joshi Puro wrestlers in the 1970s and 80s, even into the 90s. It's like we're finally seeing North American women's wrestling catch up to a level that Japanese women's wrestling has been at for
but yet
2 or 3 decades.
Biff, North American women's wrestling still has a long way to go.
Oh,
yeah, they're catching up. Yes, they're catching up, but this is a long race yet, and it's it's going to take them years to get to the level that women are at over in Japan. Sorry.
Completely agree. No. Completely agree. You don't apologize for nothing. You're absolutely right. They have done a great job now, and I say they. I'm tempted to say that Becky Lynch kind of deserves the lion's share of the credit here. WWE kind of backed into this, given what they were trying to do post SummerSlam and had to course correct. I don't want to give WWE too much credit here, but they have done a good job in building up Becky Lynch as a legitimate top level star, just in terms of overall popularity.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Now go do it with someone else. Make another star that transcends the women's division and just becomes a top star of the company, period.
They can't make a star. You're asking them to make 2?
Well, if they got lucky with Becky, I mean...
There's several names on the roster they could do it with.
Is that replicatable, what they did with Becky?
It's possible. Anything's possible.
Well, here's the thing. Here's what happened with Becky. People knew Becky was good from long before she was considered an important player on the main roster. They knew back as far as 2015 that Becky Lynch could wrestle well. And she was mistreated for the first year or so on the main roster. She was just a lackey. Mm-hmm. And then she was mistreated after she won the championship, and she was jobbed out left and right. So if we're going by the story of Becky Lynch, it's one of the main roster misusing her so badly that the people got tired of it and just said enough. They can absolutely replicate that because they do it with men and women.
They've already done it with Bayley.
Bayley and Sasha are sitting
are sitting right there. There's 2 more they could do.
Yeah. They both have the talent to transcend they make the leap. Mm-hmm. I think that Alexa Bliss is not going to make the leap as a wrestler. She could as a manager because she's got the ability to cut promos and get people into the building.
That's what I think Alexa should be anyway, as a freaking manager.
I agree.
She's so fragile. She's so fragile. I can't take a bump. Shut up, please.
If they turned Asuka loose, and I don't think we've ever seen peak Asuka in WWE.
No. Not from what I've seen, in Stardom or in other promotions over in Japan where she was at compared to what I'm seeing here? No. Asuka's down by she's maybe going at 1/3 speed.
Yeah.
You
and
know,
so if they
she would break people in half if she was going full speed. I'm sorry.
Oh, she would. No. Asuka, I don't understand the reason to this day that Asuka had to lose to Charlotte at WrestleMania. I don't understand it. I think that they could have made Asuka into like the Japanese buzzsaw of the women's division and use her to build up new baby faces all summer long. Could have gotten Naomi even more over. Mm-hmm. Could have gotten Becky Lynch more over. Now, Becky Lynch backed into something magical. So I'm glad in that respect that Becky had her shot. But, you know, what did Asuka, what was the sin that Asuka died for? Asuka died to try and preserve Carmella. Because right after Asuka lost to Charlotte dropped the title to Carmella. They wanted to build up Carmella as a new top heel in the women's division. That worked out well.
Yeah. Now what is she? She's one of those. She's
growing as a baby face.
And she's over as a baby face, and who's she with? R-Truth.
Yeah.
Please.
Like that heel run did nothing but kill Asuka off.
Yep.
So they could, if they let Asuka off the chain and just let her go out and be the man-eater that she is, yeah, Asuka could probably make the leap. Sasha Banks and Bayley could make the leap. I think Ember Moon is borderline, but if she continues to improve, she could make the leap. I'm really interested in the next generation of stars down in NXT. And I'm talking both the NXT UK and regular NXT. Because there is a lot of talent.
You got Toni Storm in NXT. You got Rhea Ripley.
Rhea Ripley is going to be a star.
Oh. And she's only 22 years old.
She's like Patrick Clark. She's got the world in front of her.
Yes. Patrick Clark's 22, 23 years old.
Rhea Ripley's a better worker than Patrick Clark is.
Well, yeah, right now. But Rhea Ripley also, she gets it, as Chris says, as Crazy Chris says. Mm-hmm. She gets it. Mm-hmm. Her and Tegan Knox are having, those two are having a ball with this whole knee thing. Even though it was an accident, they have made it. Rhea Ripley has so much heat now. She has so much heel heat right now from this thing. And those two, those two are laughing all the way to the bank.
in the next 5 to 6 years, you're going to see Rhea Ripley, Toni Storm, Jenny from the UK scene, Dakota Kai, Tegan Knox, Bianca Belair, Lacey Evans from NXT, Nikki Cross, Kairi Sane, the MMA horsewomen, Io Shirai. You're going to see all these women make the leap to the main roster at some point in the next 4 to 5 years. Well, not all at once, but they'll stagger them in.
Here's the $64,000 question. When they get there, then what happens?
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you right now that if in my dream scenario, Asuka and Io Shirai formed a tag team in tribute to the Jumping Bomb Angels called the Midnight Angels and completely decimate the women's tag team scene until Sasha Banks and Bayley come to stop them. Like, give me 30 minutes of Sasha and Bayley motivated against Asuka and Io Shirai.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I mean, take all my money. Just take all my money, right, George?
That's great. And you're not wrong, but I mean, the alarm clock's ringing and it's time to wake up from that dream.
Would Vince ever allow it? Yeah. There's another question. Well, I'm going to tell you something. This is why it's so imperative right now. If ever it was going to succeed, if ever women's wrestling was going to have a chance to make the leap, because they've been toying around with it for 3 years now as a publicity stunt, a marketing tool. But if Becky Lynch and Ronda Rousey walk into that stadium as the main event, because Vince has no other alternatives, and he sees a sellout crowd pop huge for that match, and he sees that crowd erupt and pay the reverence and respect that a WrestleMania main event historically should earn. If they do good numbers off of WrestleMania 35, and he sees empirically that women can draw in the main event, then I think that there's a shot that this division could make the leap.
Let's put it this way, Biff, and I'm going to say this. They've already done that with a Raw. Back during, I think it was either Attitude or Ruthless Aggression era, where Lita and Trish Stratus were the main event on a Raw. Okay? Did great numbers on television for that hour. They did nothing more with it after that.
Well, I think this is where Becky has kind of transcended this a little bit, where Lita and Trish were organically over. They were big stars in the women's division in their era. But, you know, we're talking about a point in time between 2001 and 2006, 2007-ish for Lita and Trish, kind of their peak years before they left, where they're competing against men like, not competing in the ring against, but like they're competing at the same time as performers like Edge, John Cena, Brock Lesnar, Batista, Triple H, The Rock, tail end Stone Cold. Like Trish and Lita were never going to be considered the top stars in the company.
No.
They were marketable stars, but they were never going to be considered the top stars in the company. Now, God knows. God knows when I say this. I don't take joy saying this. Okay, I want to make it very clear because this is a very touchy subject that I'm about to touch on.
Mm-mm.
Roman Reigns and his illness, as tragic and as horrible as it is, has left a vacancy in the company that no one is ready to yet fill.
I agree.
Because WWE did such a poor job building up other stars to work with Roman.
Yes.
They did not do a good enough job preparing for this sort of emergency scenario where Roman could not keep going. I was under the assumption and belief, and God, I wish it had worked out this way, that Roman Reigns would have just got fed up with the company's BS and left him in the lurch. I did not want to see Roman get injured or be ill and not be able to physically do it. That's the last thing I wanted to see happen. But I wanted the company to build up other stars so that they had options. Because even at the height of Steve Austin's run, they still had The Undertaker and The Rock and Mankind and DX. True main event level players that they could fall back on if Steve Austin couldn't go. Which, lo and behold, 99, Steve Austin's got to have neck surgery. He's going to be out for a year. What do? Do you just let business collapse? No. You've got The Rock. You've got Triple H. You've got Mick Foley. You've got Chris Jericho. You've got The Undertaker.
Mm-hmm.
You know, turn them loose. You know, it's like,
you know, right now, I see what you're saying there, Biff. I absolutely see what you're saying is that what really do they have to fall back on right now?
Yeah, they don't have anything right now.
The women's division on Raw is an absolute mess.
Yeah.
I right now, to be perfectly honest, couldn't even tell you who the champ is.
It's Ronda, isn't it?
Yeah.
Ronda. My bad. Jesus H. Christ.
See? Well, I mean...
Ronda, and then you got Becky over on SmackDown.
Yeah, Becky's champion on SmackDown.
That match, regardless of whether or not it's champion versus champion or not, that's going to be fire. That match is going to be on fire, and it's going to be like.
Well, see, let's break this. Let's unpack this for a second, because this was something that blew my mind last week or the week before when we were building into Survivor Series. Daniel Bryan won the WWE Championship from AJ Styles. Let's just take a moment to acknowledge this. Daniel Bryan in 2018 wrestled AJ Styles for the WWE Championship on SmackDown and won the title. What was the number one news story the next morning? It wasn't Bryan winning the title. The WWE Championship changed hands was not the number one story that week. Becky Lynch was the number one story. She was the talk of the wrestling world. She's the one that mainstream news articles are talking about and covering. She's the one that all the MMA people were getting a rise out of MMA fans by mentioning. She's the one all over social media. Now think about who the WWE has right now to fill in for Roman Reigns. Is it Seth Rollins?
No.
I don't think so. Is it Braun Strowman, who's been completely neutered in the last 6 months?
No.
Is it Brock? Brock's only going to show up once or twice a year. It's not Brock. Could it be Drew McIntyre in the future? Maybe, but you got to build him up. He's not ready to just step in immediately. You've neutered Finn Balor. He's a mid-card guy. He's not going to be able to do it. So you got nobody on Raw. Over on SmackDown, Daniel Bryan just turned heel because his face turn had sputtered out.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of old hat. AJ Styles' championship run this year has been lackluster. George, you mentioned it. You're still waiting on the first great AJ Styles match.
I'm waiting.
They've neutered Shinsuke Nakamura and Samoa Joe this year. The Miz is not going to step up and do it.
There's nobody to there's nobody to fill Roman's shoes on either brand.
There's nobody. But you know what's happening? There's one person in this company that's got organic fan support building behind them. And for the first time in the history of the company, it's not a man. It's a woman. Becky Lynch is not just getting over, she's getting scary over. And
Brave new world, man, that has such people in it. You know?
it's if Vince wanted to, he could put his eggs in the Becky Lynch basket. And it's so funny. 2 weeks ago, people would have heard that and they would have been like, you're overreacting. Now, just see what's happened over the last 2 weeks. You know, whether it was Becky getting bloodied by Nia Jax and standing tall and becoming, you know, kind of like the talk of the wrestling world, whether it's her appearances in magazines or talk shows or all the media appearances that she's done the last 2 weeks. You know, this Twitter beef that she's got with Ronda Rousey being 50 times more interesting than anything going on TV. I'm not saying that she's there yet, but they've got a shot.
Well, here's the thing, and Adam brings this up, and he's correct. You know, then we got to get back to the, you know, let's try to draw a parallel to what's happened in Japan, something similar to this. You know, we got Ronda, the Raw champion, feuding with the top two women over on SmackDown. That's Becky Lynch and Charlotte. The Raw's, like he says, the Raw's division is stagnant. And it is. It really is.
It shouldn't be, but it is. Yeah.
Yeah, it shouldn't be, but it is. And that's the sad state of affairs. You got two women right now, one on each side, one on Raw, one on SmackDown, that you could strap the company's well-being to and make and print money for days. That's Becky and Ronda. And I know that's going to piss off a lot of people. Yeah, I'm a Ronda mark. Okay.
I'm a Ronda mark too.
Huh?
I'm a Ronda mark too.
And they're saying, oh, you know, she disappeared after she got knocked out. She was forced. Let me lay this out there, people. In her last two matches in the cage, she got knocked out. Correct. She did not leave because she wanted to. She was forced to step aside for 6 months because that's UFC concussion protocol. Look it up. It's not her fault that the styles changed from grappling to striking. Her style has stepped off. So, but their concussion protocol in UFC is 6 months after you get concussed. You have to wait to go back.
They don't, for all of their sins, and they are many. They're very good with head injuries.
Yes, they are.
That's true. Yep.
And they are.
And God bless them for it too.
And yeah, exactly. And you know, God bless that lunkhead in charge, you know, for taking that shit seriously. Since pretty much, I mean, you look at Saturday night. Real quick segue. You see Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz, and Dana White forced Chuck Liddell to retire because he was tired of watching him get punched in the face, knowing that he could have just thrown Chuck Liddell out there and made money, you know, lots of money. But he said, I don't mess around with concussions. So, Takers, you're 100% right when it comes to Ronda. And even independent of that, there are people who are superstars in MMA who are not superstars in professional wrestling, Ken Shamrock. And there are people who are not superstars in MMA who are superstars in professional wrestling, Tom Lawler, you know? And that's just two off the top of my head. So it is a different world. So
and Ronda has transcended both. She's a star. She was a star in UFC for a long time.
Yes.
And now she's a star in WWE. She's the first that's been able to be a star in both.
She's a superstar. And I've said it the minute that she was introduced at WrestleMania this year.
Yeah.
She is a captivating. I'll never forget seeing 80,000 people fixated on Ronda Rousey in a match that also had Kurt Angle and Triple H.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, who are no charisma slouches themselves. You know what I'm saying?
You and I were both in the building. You remember as well as I do when she tagged in that first time.
Yep. I'll never. And you know what I'll never forget? When she was punching Triple H in the corner and he was selling for those fists, the crowd just roaring.
The crowd was eating it up.
They went banana.
Yeah. That's not. And you know what? And you may say, oh, it's Triple H at WrestleMania. They didn't do that shit for Seth Rollins.
No.
They didn't. So it's not Triple H at WrestleMania. And it's not Steph taking her usual bump. Because that didn't happen for Seth Rollins. And it didn't happen for Roman Reigns in Dallas. But it happened for Ronda Rousey. Ronda Rousey's a superstar. And Shayna Baszler is a superstar. And Kairi Sane is a superstar. And Io Shirai is a superstar. And those last three names I mentioned were forged in the crucible that is Japanese women's wrestling.
Yes. And you're exactly right. And that's the $1 billion question. Will one of those talents make the leap and become the next organic top superstar?
Yes.
Not just male or female. I mean, top company star.
I think it's time we've got it now with Becky Lynch. Why can't we have more?
I think that Becky Lynch and Ronda, they've got the world on their shoulders. If they main event now, if Vince chickens out, screw you, Vince. That's just number one, because you ain't gonna milk. You're not going to create another match that this has this much organic heat behind it.
No.
This is a legitimate, people are craving this match. And this is getting to the point where the fans are getting scary into it. Becky Lynch fans on Twitter are launching freaking holy wars.
Yes, they are.
Anyone that Becky Lynch targets on Twitter, God help you. Whether it's Nia Jax or Chris Jericho, you're screwed. Because Becky's army is going to tear you off, okay? But Becky and Ronda coming up at WrestleMania, I think that is the prohibitive favorite to be the main event in lieu of anything else really standing out right now.
Yeah, I would agree. And the thing about it is it's a scary, Vince is on the precipice of something.
Yeah,
he's looking over the edge going, do I jump into this black hole or not?
Because we know,
you and I and LL and George, we all know that if we get that as the main event, that's going to be money.
If Becky Lynch wins the Women's Royal Rumble, if I'm assuming that she'll forfeit the SmackDown title at some point between now and January, or drop it and she'll show up in the Rumble. If Becky Lynch wins the Royal Rumble and challenges Ronda Rousey, I'm buying tickets to go. I want to be there to see that match.
I may have to.
If she's stuck wrestling Nia Jax, forget it. I'm going to New Orleans and get drunk instead. But if she shows up and wrestles Ronda Rousey for that Raw Women's Championship and they headline the show, they make it a point to note, this is your main event. This is going last. They're closing the show. These are your show stoppers. Now go out and give us 20 minutes and 4.5 stars. Because they can both do it. We talk about Becky Lynch getting over organically on Twitter and her promos. Becky Lynch is a damn fine worker. She might be one of the best of the 4 horsewomen of NXT. She wrestles at a high level. She's no slouch in the ring either. But the question becomes, if Becky and Ronda can kick the door open, can Io Shirai or Kairi Sane or Toni Storm follow behind them? Can they make the leap? Because they are three of the best workers in the world. Can they follow? If they can, then Japanese women's wrestling will no longer be the only place where you can see top quality women's wrestling. You will see North American women's scene pick up dramatically. The next 5 years are going to tell the tale. Either women's wrestling is going to take off in North America in a colossal way, or it's going to collapse. And if it collapses again, I don't know that they'll ever get it back.
This is it. You're right. This is the chance, my friend. A great way of putting it. You got to grab the bull by the horns, right?
Yeah, it's do or die. We're coming up on the bottom of the ninth.
Yeah, we're running out of cliches.
Yeah.
We're running out of cliches, Biff.
This is title fight round 15.
Yeah.
No, this is the game 7.
Yeah.
There you go.
This is insert cliche here.
Yeah.
This is a good topic for you and Chris on Thursday, isn't it, there, George?
Well, I am.
That's right. You are out of town.
I am Florida man on Thursday.
I am. That's right. You are Florida man.
I am Florida man.
I got to message Chris and see if he wants to let me on so that I could corrupt that show like I've corrupted all the others in the LIP family.
You are the David Starr of the LIP family, my friend. Maybe less Jewish. I don't know. I don't know for sure.
What?
I
don't have nearly that good a hair. Come on.
Well, I mean, like he forced Eddie Kingston to be his personal servant for a year because he beat Eddie Kingston in a match, and by the end of the year, Eddie Kingston went from being reluctant yet honorable manservant of David Starr to willing accomplice because David Starr's evil corrupted him. So
I'm more the Brutus Beefcake of LIP, I think.
Oh, please.
Jesus.
I'm Big Dick Johnson.
Jesus.
And on that note, before LL takes me to task for decrying myself again, we're going to wrap it up here. I think that's a good point to jump off on tonight. Guys, it's been a fantastic run on YouTube, and I'm looking forward to seeing an even better run on Twitch. We've got so much coming in store for you over the next couple of weeks. Los Ingobernables podcast, we have made an effort, a concentrated effort, to provide you with the kind of wrestling content that, informs you, enlightens you, educates you, and entertains you. The Connoisseurs of Wrestling was started with the goal of teaching wrestling history and sharing what made us such passionate fans of the business. We enjoy these subjects as fans, whether we live through them or whether we're learning for ourselves. I'm the first to admit I have learned as much on this show as I have taught on this show. Okay,
No kidding.
It goes both ways. It's a two-way street of reciprocating all that you put into it and get out of it. But that's the joy of the Connoisseurs. It's the joy of Two Guys One Sport. Listening to Chris and George, break down the action as only they can, whether we're talking New Japan or WWE or what have you. It's why I enjoy shooting the breeze on Saturday mornings. Grab a cup of coffee and just kick back in the reclining chair and listen to Doc and TM and their guests. Just go around table. And, I love working with Greg over on Wednesday nights at Grounds for Development, covering NXT. Lord knows we got a ton of NXT talk coming up with the new TakeOver UK special announced. That's like Christmas in November for us. So we've got that to look forward to, and we've got all the good stuff coming from NXT and NXT UK. We're going to Twitch next week.
This week. Saturday.
Yeah. Saturday, first show. Saturday. And we're going to create a one-stop source for all of the LIP content that you come to love and support. And I know I speak for George and Chris and Taker and Doc and George and Greg and Don Sal, everybody else under the banner. Thank you to everyone that's listened to us over the last couple of years. You know, thank you for all of those subscriptions, the support, the likes. Thank you to everyone that's participated with us to come on as guests. You know, our family of shows, you know, going back, you know, at least several years now, this family of shows, it's something special, guys. And it's a privilege to be a part of it with y'all. It's a privilege to do this show every week. You know, it's going to be a privilege moving over to Twitch and starting a brand new channel and watching it grow. The sky really is the limit. You know, this little fraternity, this little order we got going on here. And LL as our dead mother, keeping us in line. I think that, you know, it's going to be a real special treat watching that channel grow. But the real treat is getting to hang out with y'all each week and just talking about subjects that we're passionate about.
Talking about a sport that we all love and respect.
When wrestling was good.
Yep. George, I think, would agree that even today we still have the respect and the love for the business, for the sport today that we had when we first started as fans. Would you not agree, George?
Every time I get burned out about professional wrestling, I go to a show and I'm like, oh yeah, this shit's pretty great.
Yeah, I saw that tweet. I saw that tweet the other day.
I went to a show Saturday night,
Yes,
and I
you did.
saw two fun matches, totally different. The first one, you ready? Joshua Briggs and Jimmy Jacobs versus Darby Allin and Jessica Havoc, which was a car crash in 8 minutes. And I mean that in a great way. And Jessica Havoc, the world needs more women who just beat the shit out of people. You know?
I agree.
Figuratively and literally. And just women who just show up and wreck stuff. We need a lot more of that.
Jessica Havoc can destroy me anytime she wants.
We need a lot more of that. And the other one I saw, and I would encourage you to check it out, was a 60-minute draw between Trevor Lee and ACH.
Wow.
That
whoa. Time out, George.
yes,
A
sir.
60-minute Broadway?
A 60-minute Broadway.
Oh, my God.
And the beginning of the Trevor Lee face turn. You know, so
Jeez.
it was... I like Trevor Lee. I think he's very good. But this was the ACH show. And he was masterful. I thought they could have told the same story in a 45-minute draw. Obviously, in a 60-minute draw, you have a little bit of filler just by the nature of the time. But it was still an excellent match that I would highly recommend anyone check out. So yeah, every time you think wrestling gets you down, go to a show. Go check out your local indie, and you'll feel better about wrestling.
Okay, George, on that note, where can they find you?
At Atsaves on Twitter and Instagram, GATSAV as in Victor ES. My show's Twitter feed is at 2guys1sport, the number 2 and the number 1. And we podcast every Thursday from 9, 8 Central. Except this Thursday, I will be gone, but we're still podcasting. So give us a holler. Chris is going to have some cool content. Maybe a guest, maybe not. We'll see. Talk to him. But even though I'll be Florida man this week, you should still give Chris a listen because he is that damn good.
Taker, where can they find you during the week, my friend?
You can find me on Twitter at Takers_Minion. You know, send a request for a follow. I'll usually approve it. No problems with that. Send me a message. I'll talk to you. You can also catch me every Saturday morning on Shooting the Breeze with my crime partner, best friend, Mr. Dr. Senju. We've been doing that show for damn near a year and a half now. And, I'm looking forward to this move as well, Biff. Like you said, it's going to be interesting. It's been great. It's been a great run on YouTube. You know, I missed the last show last week because of scheduling issues with my job. I really wanted to be there, but I just couldn't do it. So this Saturday, you'll be able to catch us at 11 Eastern, 10 Central on Twitch. the Los Ingobernables, the podcast channel on Twitch. So, Biff, where can they, or no, LL, where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter, Windstorm64. Or you can find me on Monday nights right here on Connoisseurs of Wrestling.
Mr. Biff, where can one find you?
You can find me at Cage Side Seats. I'm generally in the daily and nightly threads. You can also find me Wednesday evenings. We go live now late, around 10 Eastern. We also release shows next morning, Thursday mornings around 10, with Greg the Hold, my good buddy Greg from Saskatchewan, Grounds for Development. Of course, obviously, you can find me here at Connoisseurs of Wrestling each week, Monday at 8 p.m., 7 Central. Be making the move to Twitch with everybody, so looking forward to that. All of our Twitter information is down in the info box below, so you can reach us that way. Follow us on social media. Be sure to check out Two Guys One Sport on Thursday. It's been mentioned here, of course. We'll have Chris in the house doing his thing with guests, maybe, or not. We'll see on that front. But Saturday, the big move to to Twitch. First Twitch show on Saturday. So be sure to search out on Twitch. Go ahead and subscribe over there if you haven't already. We will leave these channels up. At least the Connoisseurs channel will be left up, so you can have these videos in the archive at your leisure. But next week, Monday, will be our Hall of Fame induction episode for the month of December. And it'll be our first episode on Twitch as well. So looking forward to that, guys. I think that covers everything. We got kind of the plugs in with the contact info this week.
Yes, we did.
So be sure to stay tuned. You can follow us on Twitter. Anything should happen, anything should change, you can follow us through that means. But otherwise, I think that does it. For LL, TakersMinion, and George Atsaves, I am Biff Kensington. Thank you so very much for tuning in this evening for our talk about Japanese women's wrestling. We'll be back and better than ever next week with a brand new subject, a brand new Hall of Fame inductee, and a lot of great stuff coming at you in the month of December. Be there, be hexagonal, folks. Y'all take care. We'll see you next week. Connoisseurs of Wrestling are out.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Congratulations, Adam Bryce, by the way. Ohio State didn't suck this week.
Yeah.
Still going to get your ass kicked by Alabama, though.